I just wanted to do a brief video tonight and talk about the October 2019 Watchtower Study Edition. It says, keep busy during the last days. So basically they're making a proclamation about they know when the end is. So basically they're returning to 1975 with this one. And yeah, I'll continue on. I'll read number 1. Were you born after the year 1914? Yes. And I think the Watchtower really put that in there because they have that one last hope that the generation that saw the events of 1914 will not pass away. That there's somebody out there that's 110 or 120 years old that remembers something about 1914. And they don't want to rely on that doctrine that David Splain talked about, the overlapping generation, which is, I'm perplexed by that one. I mean, that's not even, I don't even know what to say about that one because it's absolutely false and garbage. The overlapping generation doesn't make any sense. And that's what they're trying to hold on. They're trying to hope that, oh, we don't have to, hopefully there's somebody still that remembers 1914 that's old enough so we don't have to fall back on that overlapping generation because they know it's silly. Even the governing body knows it's silly. So, if so, you have lived, I'll read on, I'll continue on. If so, you have lived your entire life during the last days of this present system of things. All of us heard about the events of Jesus foretold for this time. These include wars, food shortages, earthquakes, pestilences, and increasing of lawlessness and the persecution of Jehovah's people. See, there's something new. They think they added that persecution in there. Notice how it says persecution of Jehovah's people. Now, all the articles of Watchtower and Awake articles, I can't remember of persecution of Jehovah's people that they put that in there. Right after in Matthew 24:3, where they're talking about Matthew 24, they put persecution of Jehovah's people. And I could be wrong, but I don't remember ever seeing that. And I haven't been in the organization that long. I was only in there for a decade, but again, I don't remember ever seeing it. Continuing on, we have also seen people behave in the way foretold by the Apostle Paul. See the box, the way people are now. As worshipers of Jehovah, we are convinced that we're living during the final part of the days. And here's what the scripture says in Micah about this. In the final part of the days, the mountain of the house of Jehovah will become firmly established above the top of the mountains, and it will be raised up above the hills, and to it people will stream. So they're talking about how people will stream to Jehovah's organization, will flock to Jehovah's organization. I want to show you something prior to this that will kind of disprove it. I did a video on this before, but I wanted to show you responding to God's warning today. Today, too, all people must respond to an urgent appeal that is now being announced earth-wide. Earth-wide, and it's being announced earth-wide. That's a big flat-out lie right there. They know it's not being announced earth-wide. So, yeah, and now I'll read the way people are now. Actually, I'll let you read that. Read 2 Timothy 3:1-5 if you want. But this, when I first came into the organization and I first read this scripture, because the religion I was in prior, there was not really scriptural, they didn't read scripture stuff. Stuff based on the scriptures. They did, but it wasn't, Anyway, the first time I read that, I was like, wow. But the more I studied 2 Timothy 3:1-5, and I'm not trying to discredit the Bible in any way, but I do think this is kind of a weak prophecy. This has all been going on since humans evolved, or wherever, if they came from the Garden of Eden. Yeah, this is what humans have always been. And someone will say, well, it's increased more. Especially increasing lawlessness. But I can think of like if you know anything about American history, uh, you'll know that the violence back then was just ludicrous. I mean, you could go and shoot and kill somebody, and it'd be shootings in the street every night. Granted, there is more mass shootings in America, with, again, that's another story for another time. But also, we're talking about pestilences. If you know anything about the bubonic plague, or you'd have to know what's written about it. Back in the 1340s, I believe that's when it started, the bubonic plague. And it killed basically millions and hundreds of millions of people, I believe. And the first time in history, the human history, that's when there was a decrease in population. So back then, people were probably convinced that it was the last days. Why not back then? You see, and I believe the bubonic plague was under control by 1720. I'm not sure on that. I could be wrong. But moving on. Because so much time has passed since 1914, we must now be living in the last of the last of the last of the last of the last days. Since the end is so near, we need to know the answers to some important questions. What events will occur at the end of the last days, and what does Jehovah expect us to do while we wait for those events? I'll read the latter part of that. And what does Jehovah's organization expect us to do while we wait for those events? I know Jehovah's organization will continue to fearmonger people more and more, like these articles. Of course they are. And that's what the whole part about. They're a doomsday organization. But even if 1914 was the last start of the last days, it very well could be. First of all, it doesn't mean the Jehovah's Witness organization is the only true faith. In fact, if the evidence of child abuse and the evidence of them being part of the United Nations, etc., and then not fully completing Matthew 24:14. Matthew 24:14 is not being completed by Jehovah's organization. We know it's not the truth. You just have to use your power of reason. We must now be living the last of the last days, it says that. Okay, so even if we were, do we need to be part of a false prediction organization? Again, they're going by 120 years like what they said Noah, in Noah's time, or in the book of Genesis. They're going by what they said in 120 years as being that's their timeline for 120 years. So they think in the last of the last days. But to God, God knows the exact they are, Matthew 24:36. For instance, so if 1,000 years is one day to God, 500 years is a half a day, 250 years is 6 hours, and 125 years is 3 hours. I mean, so again, they don't know. And even if we are living in the last days, a person doesn't have to be fearmongered. You're saved by grace, not by works.